We've been learning about personality, and we spent a lot of time on psychoanalysis. And psychoanalysis, we looked at the psychoanalytical stages. Psychosexual stages. And this was one of the first theories to explain how personality develops. But now I'd like to go over a couple more theories of personality to share with you, and I want to show you on this slide how they're different. So psychoanalysis, as you know, he said our personality developed by the age of 6, and this was a theory that describes how personality develops. Now, he didn't really talk about how personality would change. He thought it was through therapy and understanding of the unconscious processes. Instead of letting them drive you, you can understand them and act and control them. But then you have these other personality theories. So the trait theory is the next one that we're going to go over. And what this does is it doesn't talk about how personality develops. It doesn't really give an explanation, but it's good at describing personality and showing the differences that people experience. And I think by understanding that there are big differences between personality and that we can expect people to see the world and process information the same way that we do, I think it can help us a lot. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to humanistic theory. And this is a really nice theory. I can remember my teacher teaching me in Psych 1. It was one of my favorite ones. And this is talking about how to have a healthy personality, because this one believes in free will. It believes that we can make choices and that we can create a healthy personality. We're not prisoners of our childhood. We're not prisoners of certain traits that reside within us. And then the final one that we'll look at is another great one, the sociocognitive theory. And this says that personality is not stable. So these two, psychoanalysis and the trait theory, they say that our personality is stable and that it's not likely to change. So the trait theory would say that who you are today is who you will be at 80 years old. You may be more mature and experienced, but your basic personality is not going to change. So that's something for you to think about. Has your personality changed since you were in high school? I know a lot of you just got out of high school, but some of you have had some years in between. And do you find that your personality has changed? Have you just gotten wiser? Then these two, humanistic theory and sociocognitive theory, they believe that our personality can change. So the humanistic theory would say our personality can change from making different choices, whereas the sociocognitive theory would say that we can change by changing a variety of factors, and we'll be going over that in a future module. But I'd like to start with the trait theory in this particular lecture. So the first thing that I'd like you to do is I'd like you to write down to describe for me what your best friend's personality is like, or a family member. So just take a minute to do that. So when I ask my students in a face-to-face class to do this, we go around the room and I ask them, okay, what did you write? What did you write? And then I write it on the board. And what we find is that most people write down 4 or 5 words to describe their best friend. And what's interesting about that is that is the common number that we have for trait theories. I believe that even Hippocrates stated that our temperaments can be broken down into just 4 different aspects of our personality. We find that over and over again. Jung had a theory that had about 4 things, but what we're going to go over here is we're going to go over this one. This is the big 5 factors. So this theory says that all of us, our personality is along 5 different dimensions. So it's different according to 5 different dimensions. And what we'll look at right here is we'll look at what those 5 different dimensions are. So the first one is openness to experience. And what this is some of us we know what we like and we just want to stick with those things. Whereas other people seem to need a lot of change. They want to explore new things. They want to go and experience new types of foods, experience new places to go. So in this whole theory, nobody's better than anyone else. We're just different. So understanding that some people are more open to a variety of experiences, whereas other people say, no, I know what I like, and this is what I like, and this is what I want to experience. This is my comfort zone. So maybe you could look at it as maybe comfort zones. Some people have a narrower comfort zone. Some have a broader comfort zone as far as experiences. Then conscientiousness. This one seems to cause problems. What's so great, I like teaching this to you guys because I want you to think about your conflicts. And when we don't understand that people have different brains and that they're set up on these different 5 factors, then we tend to run into problems like, why are you being like that? But hopefully by looking at this, you can say, oh, okay, there's different brain needs, different personality because of these factors. Okay, so conscientiousness is it's kind of like how responsible and reliable are you? If you tell somebody that you're going to be there at 5 a.m., are you there at 5 a.m. or are you there at 5:15? And they say that this theory right here says that how you do something is how you do anything. So those of you that are late to class, you're probably going to have a tendency to be late to work. Those of you that pay your college fees late, you're probably likely to pay your bills late, unless, of course, you have auto pay. But basically, you have a certain level of conscientiousness, a certain level of reliability. The next one is one that we're going to spend some time on because this one's really important. Extraversion and introversion. So a lot of people think that extroverts are like people that are not shy, but that's not actually what it means. What it means is some people have brain waves that I'm going to draw it for you on the next slide. Here we go. Well, actually, we'll just draw it right here. So an extrovert might have brain waves when they're just alone like this, whereas introvert would have brain waves that are like this. So an extrovert, they seem to need more external stimulation just to get to the level to the introvert. And then the introvert, when the introvert gets a lot of stimulation, look at what happens to them. It gets a little bit overwhelming. So an introvert can be very shy, can be very outgoing and not shy. The reason why introverts tend to be shy is because they get overwhelmed by a lot of external stimulation. So they tend to stay away from the external stimulation not to be overwhelmed. So an extrovert, they seek out external stimulation because it's not usually overwhelming. It's very uncomfortable for them to be at this level. Whereas introverts, they have a lot of internal energy going on, and so they tend to want to be a little bit more alone. I remember that I had a student in class one time, and he says, "Oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Now I understand why I love people and I want to help people, but I can't be around them." So maybe some of you can relate to that. So I don't want you to think of an extrovert as outgoing and an introvert as shy, because that's not what it is. An extrovert is stimulated by external energy. It's almost like they need external forces to energize them, whereas an introvert has a lot of internal energy, and and they can be energized by their own internal stance. So one is not better than the other one. They're just different. But what happens is introverts, they kind of a lot of times feel bad about needing so much me time, so much personal space. So they tend to be drawn to the extroverts because they like that, oh, they love to be around people. That's so amazing. I wish maybe I was a little bit more like that. I want to always be alone, and it's scary for me to have fun. So it'd be fun to be with a person that knows how to have a lot of fun. And the extrovert also feels like, oh, why do I have to be around people all the time? I seem to need external stimulation all the time. And they admire the introvert and say, gosh, they seem to be so self sufficient. They don't seem to need anybody. They seem to be so comfortable with their me time and alone time. I really admire that. So, a lot of times, introverts and extroverts get together, and by not understanding this, it can create problems. Extroverts need to recognize that a lot of introverts need personal space. A lot of personal space, and it's not a rejection of them. It's just that the way that their brain works. And introverts need to recognize that extroverts need external stimulation. They cannot expect an extrovert to be self contained, to want to stay home a lot. So, what happens in the beginning of relationships between extroverts and introverts is at the beginning, they're both trying to adapt to one another. So, the introvert goes out with the extrovert more, and the extrovert tries to stay in with the introvert more. But then what happens is it's not really their comfort zone, so there starts to be some conflict. And so sometimes it's good to choose people that are like us, or maybe just slightly different than us. Or you just have to recognize, okay, that's the way they are, and they're perfect the way they are, and this is the way that I am, and I'm perfect the way that I am. Okay, let's go on to the next one, which is agreeableness. So some people seem to be more agreeable, where they can just kind of compromise more. They can just get along more. They don't really like conflict at all. They tend to be very agreeable. We can go with the flow. Whereas other people are more what I call principle based. No, it's about the principle of the thing. We don't need to agree. We can have lots of conflict because I am going to stand for what I think is right. So one person seems to be able to be molded with the shades of gray. Let's just kind of go with the flow. Let's just be more agreeable. And the other one seems to be more black and white. No, I'm not going to agree. If it's wrong, I'm going to fight more, and so on and so forth. So, again, we have some issues here. The people that are not agreeable, they tend to look at the agreeable ones and say, where is your backbone? And whereas the agreeable ones tend to look at the black and white ones and say, good gosh, you're always fighting with everybody. You're always causing problems for yourself. So once again, we can see where there's these differences. Now on this one, maybe it would be better if you went to opposites. Maybe a disagreeable person might do better with an agreeable person. Because if you have two not agreeable people, then I would think that it would be like fireworks. Whereas if you mix the two, agreeable with non agreeable, maybe that would work out well. Okay, this one, neuroticism. So this kind of has a negative connotation, and I guess I'll go with the negative connotation, but I like to look at the positive side. We learned about that in our stress chapter. Let's be optimistic here. Is let's so what neuroticism means is it kind of means that you have more of a tendency for mental instability. And we do find a lot of creativity like with that. There is a correlation between mental instability and creative genius. So I'm going to try to go on that slant. I'll also try to go with it is that some people tend to have small emotions. I picture them as small little bubbles, and other people tend to have big emotions. And the ones that have the big emotions, as you can imagine, since they're so big, they can cause more problems. So if you score high on neuroticism, it would mean that you have big emotions and you tend to be a bit more mentally unstable. But again, I want you to look at the positive that might go with it. Maybe you're very creative. Maybe you have genius in certain areas. But those of you that fit on the low neuroticism scale, your emotions tend to be smaller, and there's a lot more stability with that. So this is neuroticism. Is where do you fall on the neuroticism scale? You can think of it like this. People that are high on neuroticism, when they get mad, they get really mad. And when they get happy, they get really happy. And when they get sad, they get really sad. All right, so these are the 5 factors that supposedly each one of us vary according to. And so that if you look at each person, then you would be able to measure their personality by these 5 traits. And what's interesting is there was this old show, it was called Room Raiders, and you would actually go into someone's room and you would try to pick who you wanted to go out with by going into their room. And that show was actually based on a very famous psychology study that was dealing with this trait. They found that people could go into someone's room or office for 5 to 10 minutes and they could know more about them than if they spent 2 hours talking to them a week, 1 hour at lunch one day and 1 hour of lunch another day. And I think it was over months that they spent this time talking to them, and they were actually better judges of their personality by going into their room for 15 minutes. So some people say, oh, you can tell everything you need to know about a man by looking at his car, and you could tell everything you need to know about a woman by looking at her purse. So that's some interesting thoughts about that. Is how much can you tell about somebody by just one little thin slice of looking at them?